All right, shall we start then? Hello and welcome to our special panel publishing in peer-reviewed journals. I am Urs Matthias Sachmann from Freie Universität Berlin. I'll be chairing this event, but not talk much as we have not much time. In order to fit this session into the lunch break, we have only 60 minutes, so time is of the essence. Now, the purpose of this session is to bring together key journals in the field of Japanese studies with interested EAJS members and hopefully potential authors. So we have the structure of this panel is that we in the first half, about 30 minutes, we have representatives of the journals introduce their venues, and the following journals are represented. And I'm particularly grateful for our colleagues that they have agreed to participate in this panel and present their respective journals. After the self-introduction, we'll have a second part of circa 30 minutes for Q&A, in which participants can pose questions to the journals on the peer review and publication process. And I would particularly also encourage early career scholars and PhD students to ask questions. Now, if you have a question, then please write into the chat the word question, and I will call you up. That would be the preferred option, that you present your question orally, or you can write your question directly into the chat. And after the 60 minutes is up, there's still time to linger on for those who can and speak with representatives of the journals, provided they also can stay on. But there's also the opportunity to continue your conversation on WonderMe if you make an appointment, as it were, or agree to join WonderMe. All right, so then let us start with the first part, namely with the self-introductions of the journals. And we go in alphabetical order of the journals as listed in the chat. And so first up is Contemporary Japan, represented by Isaac Kanye. So please, Isaac.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Matthias, for organizing this, and to all the other journal editors for being part of this. And I'm very happy to be here again. I was here in Lisbon in very different circumstances, but unfortunately we're not in Ghent, but I'm happy to be here online. So I'm the managing editor of Contemporary Japan. I'm not sure if my virtual background will allow you to see the journal. It looks like this. So if you see it around on the table, it is a bluish journal. It's an interdisciplinary area studies journal, and it has an explicit focus on contemporary social and cultural issues, as well as modern history, from multidisciplinary, comparative, and transnational perspectives in humanities, as well as social sciences. It's been around for over 30 years now, and it's been managed by the German Institute for Japanese Studies, where I'm affiliated. So the journal, it's both empirically based research and interpretive analysis. So we have things which are dealing with crunching numbers and making sociological and economic statements, as well as those which are analyzing texts, interpreting texts. And usually, just to give you an idea about manuscript length, between 8,000 to 12,000. So we're on the longer side of manuscript length in terms of what we accept, and also sometimes it goes beyond that. We're flexible in terms of the length of manuscripts. To give you an idea of what's recently been published, in the chat I've just sent you the most recent issue, which just came out this week. So in terms of the process of the journal, it's a double-blind peer-reviewed journal. We publish 2 issues a year through the platform of Taylor and Francis. It's indexed in Scopus, so it's one of these which is picked up in the academic search databases and things like this. And it's ranked as a Q1 journal in area studies and history, meaning that it's ranked in the top 25% of journals in those categories according to the Scopus and Schemago ranking criteria. we especially welcome non-native English-speaking scholars to submit to our journal, and we have extensive language support for those who do. We can also accept high-quality submissions in German or Japanese, and then those will go through the normal double-blind peer review, and if they're accepted, we will translate them into English and publish them. So that's one of the features of the journal. We also publish many book reviews, and we're especially interested in reviewing non-English books, whether they be German or French or Japanese, Korean, other languages. We also accept proposals for special issues, and you can see a number of our recent special issues online. Publication time, if you submit to us, you can expect to receive, if you're accepted, you will be published within 6 to 10 months. That's a broad window, but that depends on how long it takes to get peer reviewers, which has been very difficult this past year and a half, as well as how many revisions are necessary. But at the end of all submissions, when they're published, I personally go through and edit every paper to pick up additional misses and improve the styles and formats and things like this. So we try to be very hands-on with our authors, and we try to be very open to people coming from different disciplines, different backgrounds, different languages, and different regions. So if you're interested in contacting me personally and asking more about the journal, I'm sending my email address in the chat, so please feel free to contact me. And once again, I'm very happy to be here. I look forward to your questions.
Right, thank you very much, Isaac. And next one is Japan Forum, represented by Hannah Osborne. So please, Hannah.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Matthias, for organising this panel. It's great to have a chance to see so many people, both at EAJS and on this panel, to familiarise ourselves with our readership and potential submitters. So in terms of the profile of Japan Forum, it is the official journal of the British Association for Japanese Studies. Its primary objectives are to publish original research in the field of Japanese studies and to make international scholarship available to both specialists and non-specialists. It's a multidisciplinary journal publishing contributions from across the arts and humanities and the social sciences, including from archaeology, language, literature, philosophy and culture, as well as disciplines such as history, economics, politics, international relations and law. Our current editorial team are chiefly based at the University of East Anglia, and through our connection with the Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures, we are wishing to increase submissions from the visual arts, as this has been an area that's underrepresented within the journal in recent years, maybe even decades. So this year I renegotiated our contract with Taylor and Francis, and with this in mind, so that we are able now to, and I think this is one specific feature of the journal for which it's particularly known, to produce special issues which are thematically based, but now we can do extra length special issues. We can be very flexible about the page length and quota, the page quota that we allocate, so that if we do get the special issue from the visual arts or other such special issues which tend to come with lots of images, we can accommodate those kind of publications. But we also welcome submissions that cross disciplinary boundaries or do not otherwise match the subject areas that I've mentioned so far. As well as seeking submissions from established academics, we encourage those from early career researchers very much. And I mean, Japan Forum was actually founded by a professor who wished to provide a space for his doctoral students to publish in the field of Japanese studies. So we wish to honour that kind of ethos. And one way in which we do that is we award via badges an annual Ian Nish Prize to an early career researcher for a submission that we feel demonstrates innovation through research. This year's winner for the Inish Prize is to be announced shortly, actually in October, I think. All our submissions are independently refereed, and here is the link to the latest issue that was out in June, but there is one that will be coming out in September. We have historically published about 4 issues a year, but this is going to be moving up next year to be around 5, because we're increasing our output. So my most frequent advice to potential new authors is to ensure that your research is developed enough that it's ready for publication by drawing on material that has been in some way tried and tested. And for instance, if you've been presenting a paper at an international conference such as EAJS, that is usually a very good basis for an article. And especially if you have received and integrated valuable critical feedback from leaders in the field. That's usually a solid foundation for an article. It is important that your article makes an intervention in the field and is interesting and original. So in other words, as well as demonstrating a strong familiarity with the field, you're expected to sort of go beyond that and beyond current published knowledge, either in terms of your approach and analysis or in terms of raw data. Make sure your theory and methodology are strong too, even if the topic is interesting. If the methodology or theory isn't strong enough, then it may not make it through peer review and will need substantial reworking when it does. So you need to be rigorous. I was also asked what gives us the most grief as editors and how potential authors could mitigate this. So when the article we get 3 sort of articles that are generally that fall into this category for me. And one is where the article has produced a substantial amount of research and come up with a solid theory and approach to a given data set, but hasn't followed through enough in its analysis of that data or the literary material or whatever it is that it's analysing. So in other words, when writing up, dedicate enough space to your analysis, because this is usually the original area of your article. A second kind of article that we get that might give us grief is where it's very, very dense and there's lots of information that's packed in, but that's probably not really decipherable by anyone other than the author. And so try and make sure you try and unpack your information so that it's digestible. And we sort of think that you should assume your reader is a specialist in the field who needs gently reminding of the specifics. And finally, we often have issues with articles that don't have a coherent or cohesive structure. So follow a simple structure always. I mean, it may sound cliche, but introduction, 3 main points. Make sure you follow through on those points with your own analysis, and conclusion usually works best. So that's it really, and I think that the final point is just to make sure that your outline, that your intervention in the field is clearly sort of flagged up right at the beginning of the article. That's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Just to explain, when preparing this session, I asked the editors that they should also say something about what gives them most grief and what is and how authors can alleviate that, and what is their most frequent advice to authors. Thank you very much. Good. So next up is Japan Review, represented by John Breen and Edward Boyle. So who of you is going to?
I'm going to start.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so hello everybody, and a big thanks to Matthias for setting this up and giving me the opportunity to talk about Japan Review, a journal I've edited now for 12 years. I'd like to begin by saying what Japan Review is not. Published though it is by the International Research Center for Japanese Studies here in Kyoto, Japan Review is not the center's bulletin. It's an international peer-reviewed journal that carries outstanding articles on all aspects of Japan, past and present. I'm going to show you now the latest edition of Japan Review. You should be able to see it on the left-hand side of your screen. It features 8 academic articles and 12 book reviews by scholars from Japan, China, Korea, America, Britain, France, Italy, Spain, Armenia and New Zealand. It's a truly international journal. And the essays range from classical literature through Edo period maps and colonial Taiwan to post-war anime. Many of them are by young, early career scholars. This issue has a very strong humanities bias, it's true, but we regard ourselves very much as an interdisciplinary journal. Our most recent special issue you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, and this is a guest-edited collection of 12 articles on the theme of war, tourism, and modern Japan. And we always welcome proposals for future special issues. Japan Review has a very distinctive publishing model. Straight after we've printed it, the journal goes onto the centre website where it can be accessed completely free of charge. And it goes up immediately on JSTOR as well. I think that covers the first of Matthias's 3 questions. And I'd like to take questions 2 and 3 about advice to scholars and grief together. Editing Japan Review for me is great fun and it's immensely rewarding. I really enjoy getting to know authors and reading their research. I'm a very hands-on editor. And for me, the fun starts once a paper has been accepted for publication. And I spend a lot of time with authors working on their manuscript, making suggestions, raising questions, and seeking clarification. Of course, some papers don't require much editorial input, others require a lot. Most, in my experience, require some. And when I talk about editorial input, what I'm really talking about is aspects of style. And style is very difficult to define. It's obviously not content, but it's a whole load more than how you build a bibliography or how you deal with footnotes. In the sense in which I use it, style has to do, above all, with the pursuit of clarity. So how to limit the possibilities of editorial grief, which I think was the third of Matthias's questions. Well, I recommend that authors be always self-critical, that prior to submission, they read and read again their submissions with a critical eye. And if possible, they get colleagues and even students to do the same, all in the pursuit of clarity. And that's just about it from me. Please check out the latest issues of Japan Review online. I think you'll enjoy them. And I'd like now to introduce Ted Boyle to you, who takes over as editor of Japan Review from me in October. Ted.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. My name's Ted Boyle. I'm currently at Kyushu University, but will be moving to Nichibuken and taking over Japan Review in October. I'd like to thank, by starting, Matthias and for inviting me along, even though I'm not strictly an editor yet. And I'm also very privileged, pleased to be in such august company here with my fellow editors, most of whom I haven't met before, but I may well be bombarding you with emails for advice before or after, soon after I get my feet under the desk in Kyoto. It's obviously quite daunting to step into the rather large shoes that John has left under said desk, but it's also really, really exciting to have responsibility for steering such a respected journal over the next few years. I can't comment too much on the issues of being an editor. I'd just like to pick up on a couple of threads that John mentioned. The first one was the interdisciplinarity of the journal. Much of my research and also editorial background is in border studies, itself a sort of inherently interdisciplinary field. And I'm quite keen with the idea of interventions being made in established disciplines from the margins. And that's what I'd like to be doing through the journal as it goes forward. But the second thread I wanted to pick up was his mention of clarity, and I think that's really important in an interdisciplinary journal where people may not be familiar with the particular disciplinary convention.
I'm really sorry about earlier.
Oh, hey, Julia. No worries. All worked out quite fine, so don't worry. So you'll manage
Are we good to go again? Okay. All right. So, yes, sorry, I was mentioning about clarity, which I think is really important in allowing articles to speak across disciplinary boundaries within the same journal. Those who've published with Japan Review will, I think, be very familiar with John's very hands-on editing style. And I think that's something that's important to maintain as the journal moves forward. And that's, yeah, so I'd like to emphasize to prospective authors that that's something I'm looking to keep going. Also the journal's publication model, the immediate open access, yes, I'm getting waved at. Open access is very important. I will conclude it there with the stern face of the chairman beaming at me. I also have to apologize that I have to run off to immediate moderator session after this, but I will just drop my email in the chat. So if anyone wants to get in touch, then please do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I apologize, I have to keep time, but thank you very much, and all best wishes for your start into the editorship. All right, thank you very much. So next is Journal of Japanese Studies, presented by Janet Hunter and Morgan Pitelka. I'm not quite sure if Morgan is already here, but in any case, please, Janet, if you could.
Thank you, and thank you, Matthias, for arranging this. I think it's a great opportunity. I was going to talk briefly and then be followed by Morgan. If he's not here, then I'll do what I can to answer questions.
Morgan is currently not here.
Okay, I think he may have got the time wrong because I talked to him yesterday. Anyway, I'm the co-editor with Professor Morgan Pitelka of the Journal of Japanese Studies. We also have a managing editor, but our managing editor is based in Seattle, and I think would send her apologies because it's about 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that. The Journal of Japanese Studies is published by a body called the Society for Japanese Studies, which is actually a corporation registered under the US government, but its office is at the University of Washington in Seattle. It was established in 1974, and it is both multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. And I think our objectives relate, sort of resonate with those that have been suggested by some of those who've already talked. We have a core objective of establishing an enduring record of the highest quality scholarship through the publication of empirical and interpretive work on Japan. We consider original submissions from across the humanities and the social sciences, and on comparative and transnational topics in which Japan plays a major part. Like other journals, we look for analytical rigor. We look for authors to locate specialized research findings for a broader audience working on Japan. And that is something which I'll come back to in a minute. We publish twice a year, so obviously much less frequently than some other journals. Usually with 4 research-based articles, but we also have what we call perspectives essays, offering broader evaluations of particular topics or literatures. Most of these perspectives are probably by more senior scholars. That's the sort of, they include thought pieces, but we are willing to accept proposals for these as well from anyone. We have a very extensive book review section. The book reviews essentially relate, for the most part, to the English language literature on Japan. And all submissions are double-blind, peer-reviewed, like other journals. If we think about, what is our most frequent advice to potential authors, we would always say, look very carefully at the criteria for submission to any journal. In the case of the Journal of Japanese Studies, for example, we have a clear criterion that says you have to make use of Japanese language sources. And it is remarkable how many submissions we get from people who do not do that. They don't actually use Japanese. So whatever the journal, I think you have to look very, very carefully at these criteria. We require essays that are submitted to us to be embedded in and engaged with the relevant and recent secondary scholarship in both English and Japanese. Because we think that that kind of contextualization is of crucial importance if you're going to build on that scholarship and draw in other scholars in the field, as well as the sort of the broader Journal of Japanese Studies readership. We expect articles to have a very clearly stated argument, to make an original contribution to knowledge, an indication of that contribution in the light of existing studies, and also to use primary sources where those are appropriate. But we do have a recurrent problem in submissions failing to engage with Japanese language sources on the topic. I don't know exactly what Morgan was going to say in the sense in response to Matthias's question of what gives most grief to us as editors. But we did bounce this question off our managing editor, who really is the front line and is the journal. And she would suggest that there are certain ways in which grief can be avoided on both sides, or we can try and minimize grief on both sides. One is that you need to be very careful to address your work to the readership of the journal that you are submitting to, and be sure that it is consistent with the kind of work that the journal publishes. So one example of that would be, we welcome submissions from social scientists in political science, sociology, economics, but the articulation of that work has to be done and presented in a way that makes it accessible. So if you are an economist and you submit to us something which is full of equations, that doesn't work for a general Japanese studies audience, although it might work for economists. So you've got to be very careful, I think, about looking to that. You need to follow the guidelines or instructions for submission. I think that the people submitting articles also need to have patience with the blind refereeing process. Because that, I mean, I think as perhaps Hannah suggested, relies on the goodwill of outside referees who take on that task. And they are not always very good at delivering on promptly, as it were. But you should also not hesitate to confirm receipt of your submission or to make inquiries if you don't get a prompt acknowledgement. We would also say that if a journal ever asks you to referee a submission, remember that this is how the scholarly publishing world works, and accept the task if it's at all possible for you to finish in a timely manner, because we all rely on each other. Okay, and I'll stop there. I will put in the chat the contact details, so please feel free to get in touch with us.
Thank you very much for this. Good. Yes, so we are moving on in the interest of time to Monumenta Nipponica, and which is represented by Bettina Gramlich-Oka. So Bettina, please.
Yes, good morning. I hope you can all hear me well. Good morning from New York. I arrived here less than 20 hours ago, I think. But anyway, I'm very happy to be again part of this panel, which I also was part of, I guess, in Lisbon back then in the good old days when we could meet in person. Thank you very much for letting me be here. And I'm actually already sharing with you in the chat a little bit about the journal as an introduction to save some time. We brought out a book about the history of the journal, 80 years of Monumenta Nipponica, which is on our website. You can download the PDF. If any one of you might be interested in get one of these very beautiful, glamorous hard printed copies, please write us. We do have extra copies that we would be willing to share with you. Also our MN style sheet that was also addressed already in some sort, how important it is to have some sort of a consistency in publications, and that most of the journals have already come up with their own style sheet. And so we have one that we came up a few years ago and that we keep actually updating. And there will be soon probably again another PDF up on our website. Our website gives actually lots of information about this entire publishing process as well. And as many of the my colleagues here, the other editors have already pointed out, there is not much more that I can truly share, but maybe one of the things that is special about Monumenta is that we also carry lengthy translations that have to have an academic proper introduction. It has to have a research article ahead of the translation. And I think that is one of the things that Monumenta has been also known for. And that's why our articles can also be really long. And we're not talking about 12,000 words, we're talking about more than 25,000 words. So I mean, we're talking about really long ones. And actually, let me share just with this tiny group here, sneak preview, if I can actually post this. Oh no, I cannot. I wanted to give you the sneak preview of the issue that is coming out in a couple of weeks. I guess it's too long, too bad. We do have 3 articles coming out, and that is actually our common way. We have 2 issues a year. We try to have 3 articles. And since each article is really long, I mean, that fills up, and 20 book reviews. We accept articles in the humanities. We are not interdisciplinary in that sense. It's really not going into the social sciences. We keep that. Some people think that's why Monumenta is pre-modern, which is not the case. It's just, you know, it can be also 20th century history and art, literature, whatever it is, but it is settled in the humanities. One more thing about grief or advice to authors, it's not so much grief. The grief is more that I probably, or Monumenta as a team, gives to the authors, that we just take so much time. Even after your first submission, it might take 2.5 years before you will ever see your piece published. So that is giving you grief more than you giving us grief. As an advice for potential authors, please, you know, browse former issues of the journal, you know, get a sense of it. Something that Janet just pointed out too, you know, try to make sure to cater your research to the journal. Or if you have a solid piece of research, try to identify which journal would be the right outlet. Because as you have seen with my fellow colleagues here, we all have a different kind of journal and you all produce different types of research. So make sure that you choose you know, correctly. You will save time by that, you know, waiting not for responses that we think, so how can we put that to this potential author that you really have chosen the wrong journal? So please do that. Otherwise, yeah, browse through the journals, you know, just see what kind of research, how was it presented, and everything else would be really just repeating what my fellow editor colleagues have already said. So if you have any further questions, yes, you can. Our website has lots of information, and of course, please be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bettina, also for this great advice. And last but not least, we have from Social Science Japan Journal, Meredith Shaw and Gabriele Vogt. And I think Meredith goes first. Yeah.
Yes, everyone, can you hear me fine? Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. My name is Meredith Shaw. I'm the managing editor of Social Science Japan Journal, which is the official journal of the University of Tokyo Institute of Social Science, also known as Shaken. Our editor-in-chief, Greg Noble, recently stepped down after over 10 years of service, and our new editor-in-chief is Dr. Kenneth McElwain. And as the title suggests, we are a social science journal. We accept submissions of qualitative and quantitative social science relating to modern Japanese society, which we define generally as post-war, definitely post-Meiji. And by social science, we accept across the fields of anthropology, economics, law, political science, sociology, and occasionally history, with the caveat that historical submissions have to have some kind of social science element to them, some sort of more analytical viewpoint, theoretical approach, rather than just pure history. One thing that sets us apart from many journals is our bilingual submission process in Japanese and English. So you can submit an article in Japanese and we will do the review process, the peer review entirely in Japanese. You'll get your comments in Japanese. And if you are accepted into our journal at that point, we will cover the cost of the translation. So we hope in that way to bring some high quality Japanese scholarship to an English speaking audience, as well as, of course, original English scholarship. And as we are in an interdisciplinary journal, we see ourselves as a platform for people to, if you want your research to become known outside of your discipline, within the field of other disciplines who study modern Japanese society, we would be a good destination for that. We're also an appropriate destination if you have a topic or a field of research that doesn't fit neatly into one discipline. If it's sort of a cross between economics and sociology and you have trouble getting into a purely economics journal, we could be a good destination for that. And also we provide, one of the services we provide is that we have a large pool of genuinely Japanese Japan expert referees. So if you're interested in getting your research evaluated by people who are highly familiar with the Japanese literature on your topic. And we also pride ourselves on a fairly extensive review process, which can be frustrating because it takes time. We generally require 3 referees as opposed to 2, and also usually provide extensive comments from our editorial board as well. So as I think Janet mentioned, this can be frustrating and can take a lot of time, but generally our turnover to publication is about 8 or 9 months from submission to acceptance, which I think is typical. Recommending advice for potential submissions, everything I had written down here has been said already pretty much, so I'll just reiterate. Be sure you read the submission guidelines, very important, especially talking about the format for general articles and the process for submission so that you're familiar with it. And ask yourself, is this social science? Is this a work of social science? Do I have a clearly stated theoretical model or somebody else's theoretical model that I'm challenging, followed by data? Do I clearly justify how I selected my cases? And especially for people who do a lot of qualitative work. I got a question recently that somebody asked if we accept qualitative work in a social science journal, and yes, we do. Indeed, we welcome qualitative social science, but one thing that that consistently causes us pain is that we'll often get somebody's work of ethnographic research that's really impressive and really obviously took a long time, but they have not specified the theoretical model behind this research. So they sort of dump data and really interesting facts, but fail to package it in a social science framework. And the other thing, as Hannah was mentioning, is earlier, be sure that you're writing for a wider audience than your narrow topic, because we are an interdisciplinary journal. So that's been said by several people, and I think that's a running theme, is know the audience, read the other things that have been published. That can be a big help to you in determining if your paper is appropriate to SSJJ. And I posted the link in the chat to more information about our journal, so I welcome you to go there and check it out.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Gabi, you wanted to add something, or no? You're good. Yeah, okay.
I don't really have anything to add, just in case you were wondering why I'm here, because I'm sort of, it's so-called a regional champion, and maybe that also speaks to the features of SSJJ, because SSJJ not only does it have a really large editorial board, but also extensive networks across the globe. And I think it was in 2017 that SSJJ institutionalized somewhat these networks. And so there are 4 of us right now worldwide. And actually David Chiavacci and myself, we cover the region of Europe. So we are kind of outreach ambassadors and always happy to also serve as connecting points, as Madoguchi for prospective authors. And maybe just a follow-up also on what Meredith said about the publishing process. I think these large networks, they will help papers to really be substantially improved in the resubmission stage, actually, because there is a lot of people, a lot of eyes looking at these manuscripts, and so the feedback really will be extensive. And I think, as painful as it is as an author, and I know that myself, when you get all these lengthy comments from reviewers, it's really good and it helps, and the outcome will be improved. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for mentioning that, Gabi. Excellent job as regional champion for 4 years and running now.
That's a very nice idea with this regional champion thing. Yep. Good. Before we start with the questions, Isaac has signaled that he forgot to address the last 2 questions. So let's give him a chance to do that just quickly.
Yeah. Sure, sorry about that. I just completely skipped questions 2 and 3. Just very quickly, I mean, pretty much everyone said everything that I was going to say, so I don't have to say too much more, but I will give 2 points of advice and 2 bits of grief. One is, whenever submitting to anywhere, make your contribution clear upfront and support it with evidence from your research and literature. Don't just make assertions. And that's, I think, pretty much everyone has already said something like that. But if you're big on assertions and short on facts, then that's not so good. Second, especially for the European Association of Japanese Studies, everyone here, if you're non-native English speaker or multilingual, take advantage of your language skills and incorporate research on Japan and other languages that might not be available to English-speaking audiences. This is an incredible asset if you have it. I don't, unfortunately, but if you do, make use of it, because this can set you apart. It can set your research apart. It can make it much deeper. There's things that you can access that many people can't. So that's an advantage that I think many of you here can draw on. In terms of grief, basically everything that's already been said, but more generally, lack of structure in articles is really frustrating. If you don't know where it's going, that's very frustrating. And second, again, articles that make assertions without supporting them with evidence. The other thing that really is a source of grief is articles that just repeat stereotypes. So as scholars, we need to nuance rather than essentialize, right? And so if your article begins or your argument begins, Japan is a collectivist society, and then that's kind of how you conclude the analysis, it's not going to be welcomed very warmly by us or the reviewers. So try to do something more rather than just repeat what people say or these stereotypes that are floating out there. So that's all I wanted to add. Thanks so much. And sorry again.
Thank you very much. Good. Then let's transition into the Q&A. As I said, please indicate in the chat that you want to pose a question, and posing it early is much appreciated, but otherwise you can also put it directly into the chat. Please use the Zoom chat, not the Hoover chat, otherwise it becomes a bit confusing. Right, and then there's the first question by Barbara Geihorn. I would like to ask Janet Hunter to give us a rough idea about the average turnaround between submission and publication. So, Janet, could you?
Okay, thank you for the question. This is actually a difficult one to answer because, like all journals, we depend on the number of submissions that we receive. About sort of 3 or 4 years ago, we were able to, if we accepted an article, to publish it very, very rapidly. Indeed, we were worried that we were not getting sufficient submissions. At this point in time, we have lurched from famine to feast. And we currently have, we are now scheduling accepted articles for publication in early 2024. Now, my managing editor, I think, says that length of time is not something that she's experienced before in her many decades. So it does go up and down. But if you ask, you mentioned between submission and publication, and it is the case that we try and get comments back on an initial submission from referees within 3 months. But the majority of articles are not going to be accepted immediately, and we will ask for some revisions and then consider it again. And I think this is obviously standard practice. We don't have deadlines for resubmission of revised articles. So in some cases, it's very much up to the author how long they take and whether they decide they want to resubmit. But I suspect the majority of revise and resubmits will come back within a year. So I think the important thing is between acceptance and publication date, and where we tell authors who are accepted when we would expect to publish, and then if they think it's too long, then it's up to them what they, if they decide to withdraw it, but hopefully they will not do that. But it may be different next year.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? By Ian Lewis. When is generally the best moment to approach a journal? That is, when the paper is complete from the author's perspective, or at a time before completion? Yes, do you work, that people send you an abstract and say, so this is what I'm going to publish, or what is the best time to do it? What would you say? Are there any preferences?
I may say something.
Yes, Bettina.
I think for our case, for Monumenta, it should be super complete, period, especially from the perspective of the author, because even if the author thinks it's complete, it's not complete yet. So super complete would be my answer. Sometimes we get requests about, okay, I have this and this in mind, what do you think? Well, we cannot think for them. So instead of us guessing what this thing could be or could become in the future, just, and as one of my colleagues mentioned, have it even already tested. So even, having friends read it, getting feedback, then I guess, the process will be smoother. It will be more enjoyable for everyone. The peer review process will be also a little bit more positive, we can assume. So that would be my answer. Super complete.
Yes, but from an author's perspective, so I want to submit to a particular journal, let's say Monumenta Nipponica. I know it has a particular profile. I draft the article, try to make it super complete, and then it is being rejected in the end. That is quite a long time. I probably want to know in the first place whether it fits at all into the journal, whether people would be the editors would be interested to look into it at all. So how do you do that without sinking too much time into it?
Yes and no. I mean, one thing quickly, because it was perhaps Monumenta. I mean, if the editorial team cannot read the result, only a little bit about the idea, it's very hard to evaluate. You know, we get really many emails saying, oh, I'm thinking about this and this project, or I have something in the, you know, at work that is about, would you be interested? It's really difficult to say anything before we see a result, a complete article that has an introduction, an outline, and tells us what is new about it, what is exciting, what are the results. If that is still all missing, it's very difficult for us to give any judgment about it. So yes, it's maybe grief for the author in a way, but there is not much more that I think. We are a very small team on top of it in Monumenta. I mean, it's really a small team, and we try to be as quick and also as you know, concise in our answers. But the more you offer, the better we can give advice of what to do with that, I think. So, but maybe others, of course, might have better advice than us.
Sorry. First Janet, then Hannah, and then John.
Just very briefly. I mean, I think Bettina is right. It's very difficult to make an assessment. I think, however, we would be happy if you are not sure whether the subject matter of your research would fit within the journal framework and appeal to readers. I think we would certainly be happy to receive an email saying, I'm working on this area. Does it fit? Would it fit? Assuming it reaches an appropriate quality in your journal, and we would write back and say, well, definitely, we think you would probably be better going to another journal, or yes, we are interested in the subject matter, but you've obviously got to meet our requirements and our criteria. And we'll consider it at a later stage.
Thank you. Hannah?
Thank you. Yes, I completely agree as well with Bettina's comments. But one exception I would say is where we tend to have discussions with authors prior to submissions is when there's a special issue. And if there's been a panel that's been particularly successful at a conference, or there's a group of scholars that have really sort of come together over a specific theme, sometimes there'll be discussions between us, and not all the papers may necessarily get through peer review. And sometimes it takes a while for the special issue to sort of really materialize, but especially because they are usually sort of slightly larger projects, they are something that we discuss with the special issue editor in advance of them being submitted.
Thank you. John?
Yep. Thanks for the question. At Japan Review, I take lots of inquiries about the suitability of articles, but what I don't do is read drafts of essays for people. I simply don't have the time. It's really a one-man show at Japan Review. But I should say that I think in the past 12 years, with just 2 exceptions, I've sent every essay that's been submitted, every article that's been submitted has gone out to peer review. So I've not turned down anything on the basis of its sort of fit with the journal profile. Matthias, should I answer the question that I can see has just come up on chat about that's directed to me, or do you want to wait? Should I wait to answer that? Matthias, can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. I keep muting myself. Yes, please go ahead about clarity in writing.
Yeah, there's this question about clarity in writing, which is a really difficult question to answer. And I'd be quite happy to speak to Simon about this at greater length. But just on the basis of my reading of articles submitted to the latest edition of Japan Review. Three things, they may appear to be really, really minor, but for me, they've served to obscure the clarity of otherwise very, very interesting articles. One of them is repetition. Lots of authors unthinkingly repeat themselves, and it creates a very sort of stodgy, sticky feel to an article. That's one thing. The other thing is, my advice is avoid the passive at all costs. Use the active voice. It's very good for sort of pinning down agency. And the final thing I would think, again, this just comes from my, without thinking about it too carefully, but it comes from my experience of editing this latest volume, is short sentences tend to be clearer than long sentences. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but those are just three things that occurred to me from working on a few essays over the past week or so.
Yes, thank you very much. I fully agree with what you said. Also from my own experience, cutting down often makes it clearer, and yes, be more concise. I once was recommended a book called Plain English for Lawyers, which was very good. Has the same advices that you give. Is also very good for clarity and other recommendations. All right. Then there was a question from Michael Kinadeta on the issue of copyright. When you...
sorry. May I answer that question maybe as a start, because we deal with this
okay,
kind of...
Who deals with copyright? Yep.
Yeah, with giving permissions for reproduction. That's how I would actually call that. The copyright still sticks, of course, with that person, but that you can actually publish it in your journal, whether images and so forth. And yes, I mean, Monumenta, we have been dealing with this for many, many decades already. And in the upcoming issue too, we have actually many images from different types of archives. With temples, it can be very tricky, but Monumenta does usually help getting these permissions. And I think most of the journals probably do the same process. And because the author will have a contract with Monumenta that has, it's about that the product, intellectual property stays with the author, of course, but the article becomes Monumenta's, or actually in extension, Sophia University's, product. So because of that, we do help and support, in particular with, Japanese archives and so forth, and institutions. We have like templates and so forth. This is something that, of course, goes, is time consuming. And as I said, we are a small team, but we do that, we help with that. But yes, temples can be tricky and also costly. So it really depends also on the price, how much they would ask you for. A budget we do actually have for these kinds of getting permissions, but that is something that would have to be negotiated. So once an article is accepted, then these negotiations would get started as well. I hope I sort of answered partially that question, but maybe others have better or other experiences with that.
Thank you very much. Yes, that answers the question for your part, but I was wondering, Hannah, you said that Japan Forum wanted to increase its visual arts profile as well, and of course their copyright is an issue. Do you have any experience how this works? I, for example, had to when I edited a volume, and they said to me, "Yeah, well, you take care of the copyrights." I was completely out of my depths how to do that, actually, and they actually didn't know so well either. So, yeah.
Thank you, Matthias. Yes, well, I think there are several different ways in which the copyright issue can sort of be resolved. But yes, sometimes, obviously, a certain image is out of copyright or something, and then of course you're free to use it. But if that's not the case, we have had some authors trying to get through that circuit using but it's a screenshot or it's something like that, and we've had to sort of just really reject certain articles on that basis, because we do need to be able to have the copyright either in place or be able to secure that through TNF, which will be the major sort of team that are engaged in doing that. So I'm sorry, that's a bit of a fuzzy answer actually, but you know, there are so many variables really with each sort of set of images and so on, and so far there's only been sort of really one instance where it's become an issue and we've not been able to publish something because they've insisted on using certain images that it would have been extremely expensive to get the copyright for, and they insisted on including them, and we said we weren't able to. So that's the only instance I really know of that.
Thank you very much. We are already at the official end of our time. So I now, it's up to me to formally thank again the participants of this panel for attending and giving brilliant information and answers to your questions. We can continue, and also I have to thank actually Jan from Nomad IT, who took care of us as well. So we can continue to linger on, and if there are still questions, we can address them as well. Otherwise, please write to the editors and with your questions, or agree to meet in WonderMe and other venues. Yeah, so first of all, thank you all very much. And yeah, I hope you get very, very good submissions from this as well. And referees too, who agree to review the submissions. I understand that this has been quite a problem in the past year to get referees, especially. I don't know why COVID should actually impact on that, but so it is. Okay, shall we continue a little if there is still interest? Are there still questions?
Can I just address that point? Yes, Matthias, thank you. Yes, I mean, it is actually true that securing peer reviewers was particularly difficult during COVID. I think many academics were really badly impacted by that, both in terms of their workload. We did have a slightly longer peer review process during that time, but I'm very grateful to many of our excellent peer reviewers who did also manage somehow to continue peer reviewing articles for us during that, particularly during the lockdowns in various countries. Yeah, in very adverse circumstances. But we seem to be back in a bit of a better place at the moment.
All right, Meredith?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, since everyone's here, the peer review issue has been difficult, but also we've had a lot more submissions in the last year since various lockdowns have happened. And I've heard rumors that other journals are also seeing this, but I wondered what your experience is. That we don't really know the exact reason, but it seems like people are locked down in their homes and they're maybe finishing projects that they had been sort of thinking about for a while, or I don't know why, but we've just had about twice as many submissions in 2020 as normal. And then 2021 also has continued kind of a higher than normal trend.
So more people are submitting and less people are refereeing. That is not such a great combination.
Yeah, and I don't know how that relates to COVID or if it does, but it's just something I've noticed.
Yeah. First John and then Janet.
this question about peer review is a really important one. It relates to the quality of article that ends up in the journal, and of course it relates directly to the amount of time it takes from submission to publication. But at Japan Review, I think many of my fellow editors know this, but at Japan Review we pay our referees, which often means that they're quick to take the bait. They often agree very quickly to referee for us. But unfortunately, it doesn't mean that they always reply immediately, nor does it necessarily mean that they reply more fully than they would were they not being paid. So I'm hoping that my successor, Ted, is going to bring in some new rules about what we expect from our referees in return for what we pay them. But just on this question that a number of other editors have referred to about the time it takes from submission to publication. I think, was it Meredith who said something like you have an 8 to 9 month turnaround, which is absolutely fantastic. And I think Janet was speaking of a much longer turnaround. Well, at Japan Review, I suppose on average, it's about 18 months, something like that. But as with the other journals, we don't have submission deadlines. We accept articles all year round. And it really comes down to this question, how quickly you can get a referee, how thoroughly the referee does his or her job. And then again, how quickly the author responds. But as I said in my short introduction, in a sense, that's where the sort of process starts in Japan Review. That's when I start working with the authors on the article, and that can also take quite a long time. But yeah, I suppose 18 months to a couple of years is probably what it's going to be on average in Japan Review.
Mm. Thank you. Janet?
Yes, just briefly. I mean, I think we have not experienced a huge increase in the number of submissions, but I think what we have experienced over the last sort of couple of years is on average rising quality of the submissions, and that obviously will contribute to a longer waiting time. But I mean, we do think that trying to get referees is a real problem. I mean, our managing editor, Martha Walsh, she's got a blacklist of the people who don't reply, don't deliver. And I have to confess that they include very, very senior scholars, And often we say, well, why don't we ask X to review something or to be a referee? And she says they won't reply. So there is I think this is an ongoing problem. And what John says about paying referees, I think that this sort of exposes the variety of funding models of journals. We're all very different. Some are published by big commercial publishers, like Taylor and Francis or whatever. And I think there is an assumption that all journals make money, often on the part of the people who are submitting to them. And that is not the case. I mean, the Journal of Japanese Studies, it has an endowment, but the endowment is not enough to sustain it. And at some stage, we may have to change our funding model. So there's a real diversity there. And the idea of paying referees is in our case, just not on, unfortunately.
Mm. Yeah. But it is, of course, a problem, even more so for early career scholars, right? I mean, if they submit 18 months or longer can be a problem. It's better for established colleagues. They can wait a little more, but all the more this is, and of course, you must not do multiple submission. That is probably the capital. I mean, the worst thing you can do. So yeah, it's a squeeze, I guess, and also more that senior colleagues should referee, or that people should agree to referee. We have one question also from Eiko Honda. I wonder if anyone could discuss gender equality policies. Increasing numbers of publishers are implementing. There's been a study that male scholars submission has increased, female scholars submissions have stagnated during the COVID. Yes, Hannah at first, and then Janet again.
Yes, I was very much aware of this, and I know that, you know, I mean, as a mother as well during COVID, particularly during lockdown, things were very, very difficult indeed, and women's, you know, roles as parents and scholars were often very compromised. So obviously, you know, as a journal, we have a, you know, an understanding of that and sensitivity towards that. We always encourage submissions from early career researchers, as I said, and I think, you know, we're also always on the lookout for, you know, material that is from female scholars and so on. But in a way, from our end of things, beyond welcoming them and sending them out for peer review, I'm not sure what else we can do. I mean, if ACO's got any sort of suggestions, you know, because the impact is on female scholars not being able to submit in the first instance, I think. And I have noticed that there have been more male submissions, and we tend to sort of course, you know, we have been sort of applying the same kind of criteria that we always do, that, you know, we look at a submission on the basis of, you know, whether it's rigorous, whether it's innovative and interesting and it fit for our journal. And then if it is, we send it off to peer review. So yes, I'm sorry if that's not a satisfactory, conclusive answer for ACO, but I am very aware of this problem.
Thank you. Janet?
Yes, I mean, it is a very real problem. And I mean, because of that, we actually did an audit, as it were, in terms of the gender breakdown of the submissions that made to us. And we found that, if anything, over the last sort of 18 months, the number of submissions from female scholars has actually increased. Now, whether the effect of this is going to be felt a bit further down the line is obviously, we have to wait and see. But more broadly, the trustees of the Journal of Japanese Studies, working in conjunction with us, we're embarking on discussions about much broader issues, not just of gender diversity, but also of, you know, representation of ethnic minorities and other forms of diversity, because the whole field of Japanese studies is not necessarily representative of some of these forms of diversity, and that's a much bigger issue, which seems in many respects very intractable, but is something that we are thinking about.
Thank you. Right, there's a comment from ACO.
Just another comment.
Yes, please.
As Janet mentioned, we also noticed actually an increase in female scholars submitting over the past year and a half. Not sure why, but also an increase in geographical diversity, which is interesting. So more from Southeast Asia and even Northern Africa. So I don't really know what's happening in these cases, but it does seem to be actually more diversity in the past year and a half for us, at least.
Right, thank you. Yes, and a comment from ACO that there are workshops from OUP, for example, Oxford University Press. Yes, but please continue the discussion. That would be good. Now, or I don't know. Are there any comments on that still?
Thank you, ACO. That's a really interesting piece of information, actually. I'm really glad to hear that about OUP. Yeah, I mean, actually, at Japan Forum, as a team, we only took over in March, but we have been planning to get a few PhD workshops off the ground. So definitely that's something that we've got in the pipeline, and I will consider this in the light of gender imbalance at the time when I sort of look at various applicants for that. But yeah, thank you very much for that information.
Mm-hmm. Good. Maybe one question from me, because and this is on language. I mean, that has come up quite often, actually. English language, Japanese language, which journal is going to review non-English titles, and you know, of course, always the requirement to include Japanese language materials as universally as possible. Do you have any experience? Is there any, you know, of the division between English and non-English speaking authors? Is there any experience that there are more English speaking, or that they are more successful English speaking authors? And how do you cope with this kind of, if there is a certain kind of bias? And Isaac, you said that it might be an advantage of including also non-English sources if you have the language. Sometimes I thought this was from my experience, this was a bit of a double-edged sword, because when I included actually English language secondary material, then probably a referee would say, why is he including such weird, you know, such weird material? I mean, you know, kind of certain, I felt a bit discriminated, but I guess, yeah. So is there any experience, and how do you help non-English, you know, non-English native speakers with this? Yeah, Bettina. And then,
yeah, well, I mean, I think everyone who has worked with Monumenta, they know how the copy editing process, you know, how intense it is. And it really doesn't matter whether you're a first language speaker or writer or not. It doesn't guarantee one or the other. You know, there are so many people within the team who go through that manuscript line by line, word by word, and trying to really bring out clarity in the end. And so whether you are, what is more the issue, I think, is really that in Monumenta, at least, there was this English academic standard that was, you know, adapted to have, you know, this is the style of how an article should look like. For instance, not using passive voice, which, you know, the Germans are famous for that. And also you shouldn't have long sentences. Hey, we are born with long sentences. So, and you, of course, you don't want to give away your argument until the very end and the conclusion, right? So actually redoing this all, but this is all part of the copy editing process. This is when I get started. This is the moment we say, okay, this article is accepted. And now I sit down with the author, and we go through, you know, tons of emails and versions of the article to really get it to this kind of standard that Monumenta has set up under Kate Nakai. So I'm of course far away with it. I'm not a first language speaker. You know, this is not my field, but I can at least help in the development of the article. So it really doesn't matter from what, you know, your language or the skills that you bring to it. And what we also sometimes do, and is if we identify a Japanese article that is just wonderful and deserves a larger audience, we have a budget for that to have it translated, and then we rewrite it, honestly. I mean, we have to, in order to make it approachable to the audience that is so different to the Japanese reading audience. So we do these steps. So this is really not something that any of the potential authors should be worried about, thinking, oh, I do make grammatical mistakes or something. And of course, you should try to have a super complete article that you send to any journal in terms of, in particular, of content. But, you know, these little things is something that in the process.
But I mean, in the humanities, you know, much relies on how you sell your argument as well, and you're more supple and more flexible if you're a native speaker, maybe. But yeah,
not in my experience. But anyway, there might be other.
Yeah, good to hear. John, and then Meredith.
Just a couple of brief comments on that. When I took over Japan Review 12 years ago, one of my projects was to use the journal as a means of publishing cutting edge Japanese research. But in fact, I failed. I published 2 really good articles that were submitted in Japanese, refereed in Japanese, and accepted and then translated. But it became too much work. I simply couldn't cope with the number of suggestions I had for articles in Japanese. So it hasn't worked so far. That's the first thing. But I still would like to see, cutting edge Japanese scholarship in Japan Review. The other thing relates to non-native speakers. I very much encourage non-native speakers to submit to the journal. But once the article, it's very rare that a non-native speaker is rejected on the grounds of his or her less than native language skills. But once the article has been accepted, I do ask, of course, I go through the paper very carefully, but I do ask the authors to get a native speaker to read it for them. That's something that I think that, and once the article has been accepted, it's the responsibility of the non-native speaker to do. And perhaps that just reflects the, the small team we have here at Japan Review. But yeah, that is that's an ask I make of authors, or I've done so far.
Thank you. Meredith?
Yes, I reiterate, I agree with all the points that have been made, and I would just say that it's something that we have struggled with a lot, that, in principle, we go through our review process on the basis of the scientific value of the paper, and we do not pass judgments on the writing quality, and that's our job as editors after acceptance to make the article more readable and to work with the authors in principle. But I would be lying if I said that it doesn't color our impression of the article. If it's really hard to follow the argument, and usually it's not an issue of grammar so much as an issue of phrasing, particularly for the Japanese authors, the way that they're taught to write papers and the way that they're taught to sort of present themselves in writing is different. And I don't know a good solution to that other than to just keep repeating, avoid passive voice, avoid triple negatives, things like that. But also, I just wanted to mention that, as John mentioned, we also request that our authors have a native speaker check, or possibly, if possible, that they get a professional proofreader. But we had a few situations in the last fairly recent time where someone actually paid a professional proofreader, and they did not do a good job at all. So it seems like there are a lot of groups out there that are kind of, I don't know if it's a scam so much as just they don't quite fully realize that, they're not providing the service that they say that they're providing. And so we've had one author had to get completely done over copy editing. So there are several very professional copy editor companies out there, but try to I guess through word of mouth is the best way, get one that really knows what they're doing, that's really native speakers, and not I don't know how to say this, but not people in India who speak English pretty well, but maybe aren't fluent in English. That tends to be the problem. And
it's also a matter of discipline, I find. Some copy editors are not used to the language in humanities, for example. They
or the
natural sciences or so.
The natural sciences, that's true. Or the particular style of writing in social science journals.
Yeah.
But and this copy editor was based in Taiwan, but perhaps they were used to a different kind of article. So I don't want to tar and feather them completely, but they did not copy edit sufficiently for publication.
Thank you. Janet?
Yes, I would sort of endorse what Meredith has said. I mean, we too have received articles that where the author tells us explicitly that they have had them copy edited, and the quality is just not possible to progress with. But I mean, it seems to me, I mean, we also welcome submissions from non-native speakers of all kinds. And it seems to me that there are two issues that come out of this. One is although we can offer copy editing help at the later stage, the original submission must be in a state where we can make an appropriate academic assessment. If the language is just not good enough, you know, we've had one or two which, you know, basically it's Google Translate, you know, and it doesn't work. So they've got to meet that hurdle without us. But I think, I mean, as Meredith suggested, I mean, the problem is often less in the language, which we can probably cope with, but in their expectations of their audience and how they articulate their ideas and the assumption they make about what the audience will or will not know. You know, I mean, you mentioned, well, obviously Japanese scholars assume a certain knowledge base on the part of readers in Japanese, which of course their English language readers will not have. And I think that's also true of non-native speakers from some other areas. So I think we would find that's a bigger problem than the language. We can tweak the language. We can help tweak the language in a way that is appropriate.
And also as a consolation, I might add, from my experience when I was in Edinburgh, I find that English native speakers often do not write so well either. So that levels the field a little bit.
That is absolutely true. What we find is we have to wrestle with the difference between English, British English, and North American English.
Yes. Okay, so thank you very much. I think people are getting restless a little bit, and we don't want to detract them from their late lunch or from other panels too much. Please get in contact with the editors, and if you have more questions or agree to meet in Wonder. Again, we have almost the full panel time covered. So again, thank very many thanks to the panel, to the editors and representatives of the journals who have kindly agreed to participate, and also to the EAJS members who came in and listened and asked questions. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to see you again in some other panel, and for now, so thank you very much again.
Thank you for your organization.
Thank you
very much, Matthias. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.